Welcome to the Art of Healing podcast, the podcast that is dedicated to helping you connect with your mind, body, and spirit. This is Charlize, physician and Reiki master, and thank you so much for joining me. I would like to remind you that although I'm a physician, the information you receive in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. You can find my full disclaimer at my website, www.healingartshealthandwellness.com. If you like what you hear on this podcast, sign up for my weekly newsletter. Check your show notes for more information and for the link to sign up. Thank you. Hello, Art of Healing podcast listeners. Thank you so much for joining me. I am so excited to have a special guest on the Art of Healing podcast show. I am joined by best-selling author Lisa Tahir. So Lisa is a therapist who has a bi-coastal practice. She practices in both New Orleans and in Los Angeles. She is a licensed therapist and she hosts a podcast called All Things Therapy. She's also an author, and her book is The Chiron Effect, Healing Our Core Wounds Through Astrology, Empathy, and Self-Forgiveness. And her book has been endorsed by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. So for you listeners, you'll want to definitely have a listen to this episode, maybe have a listen twice, because she shares some information about some of your own astrological chart reading. And I did ask Lisa to give us a recommendation about how to get your own details of your own astrology reading, particularly if you're planning on getting a copy of her book and working through it. Also, she has a really special offer to share with you listeners that you'll want to listen all the way to the end. It's a really great offer that you'll want to take her up on. Enjoy. All right, Lisa, thank you so much for joining me as an Art of Healing podcast guest. I got to tell you, when I first started to become acquainted with your work and what you do, I have been hoping that someone with astrology knowledge would show up, and you did. And then, of course, someone with your background showed up, of course. But I have prepared some topics I wanted to cover with Lisa. And the first one of these is for the listeners that are tuning in and that are going to probably want to get copies of your book. You use both psychology and astrology. And I did mean to ask you this before we got together, but do you have recommended resources if someone wants to do their full astrology chart reading? Is there something that you prefer to use when you work with your clients?
I do, Charlize. And first, I want to thank you for having me on Art of Healing. I love that you combine medicine with Reiki and energy healing. It's so rare to see a physician doing that. And I hope it becomes more and more widespread. And so thank you for who you are and what you do in the world and for having me on.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And I do a website that I really like because it makes astrology easy to understand. I'm a psychotherapist, not an astrologer. So I bring in astrology and the placement of Chiron through a psychological and taking of personal responsibility lens, which I know we're going to get more into. But if you don't already have a favorite site to look at your whole chart, I really like AstroTheme, AstroTheme.com, because they have a lot of learning resources there as well. And you can get different variations of your chart. And there's so much information to educate you if you don't already know. And for those of you that are more advanced in astrology, it will speak to you as well, because there's so many different ways that you can pull up your chart, then it could be really exciting for somebody with a lot of education and experience in astrology.
Oh, great. Thank you. I
Yeah.
have just started into reading your book as well, and I'm doing my process. And as I start reading it, I thought, oh, wait, am I going to need my entire chart? So thank you for sharing that, because as the listeners are going to want to probably for themselves, and I will be getting a little bit deeper into my own astrology chart. I know I'm an Aquarius. I know I have a
Okay.
moon sign in Leo, and then that's
Yeah.
about all that I know. So I plan to dig
Okay.
deeper as
Yeah.
well. So, Lisa, can you share with us how do you define psychoastrology, and how useful is this?
Sure, Charlize. So for me, words are really fun. A favorite book of mine is the dictionary and has been since I was young. And when I was writing and researching my book in conversation with a friend, we came up with psychoastrology, which simply demarcates that intersection between our personal psychology, our upbringing, family of origin, genetic predispositions, as well as where that meets our natal astrology, our birth chart astrology. And for some of you, like me, you might have a little struggle around astrology that, hey, something in the stars dictates my life, because that's what I used to believe, Charlize. But I've come to understand that we actually wrote our astrology chart as creators. We wrote and pre-paved the life that we wanted to come here to live on planet Earth. And therefore, we are able to really change our life experiences through what we believe is true for us, which is what my book really gets into, shifting your thought patterns, which then create belief systems, which then dictate the behaviors that we engage in and don't engage in, the orbit that we habituate and call our daily routine of people, places, and things, and the people, places, and things that orbit us. And I see us like a mini solar system, Charlize. We're little planets, and we habituate our daily routine and call it our lives. And we really have a lot of free will and choice to keep what we like and change what doesn't feel so good to us through understanding our patterns of thought, often sourced in core wounding, which is what a limiting belief really is. It's decisions we make about ourselves and life when something wounds us. And that's what my book helps for you to really change and look at so you can be happier and not hold yourself back because of things in the past that have hurt you.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, I've shared some with my community that one of my hobbies is astronomy. I like to stargaze,
Ah,
and
yeah.
which you'll understand too. Like, on the other side of the spectrum, there are a lot of people who get furious if you bring up astrology and you
Right.
imply that the stars can have effect. But something that you said that is kind of my personal belief is that, we create our reality with our patterns, with our daily
Mm-hmm.
existence. And I personally believe that every mass has its own gravity that you attract. So maybe you have the gravity of a
Yes.
human, or gravity of a planet, or gravity of a galaxy, but you attract. So um, yeah, I do like to play
I
with that
love that.
idea. Yeah, yeah. And as I was reading, I thought, yeah, this jives exactly what I feel. So, and can you correct me? Is it Chiron? Is this Chiron or
Yeah, you got it.
Chiron?
Chiron. CH is like a K.
Okay,
Chiron.
Chiron. So,
Chiron.
can you share with us who and what is Chiron?
Absolutely. Chiron has been written about for in ancient and more modern traditions. Carl Jung wrote in his work on the collective unconscious, Chiron is the archetype of the wounded healer, meaning that within us, our wounds contain the propensity and power to transform our lives. And we see that in Greek mythology. Chiron was the Greek centaur, half man, half horse, of the healing arts and Greek mythology. And when we go to the doctor today, Charlize, and you see the staff of medicine, the staff with the two snakes twisted around it, that was given to Asclepius by Chiron, the Greek mythological founder of medicine, of therapy, of botany, of psychology, of the healing arts, and as well in astronomy, which you love. Chiron, Chiron, was discovered as a minor planet and a comet. It has both designations in astronomy, which is rare, and it has an elliptical orbit between the planets of Saturn and Uranus. It was discovered in the early 70s. And in astrology, Chiron speaks to the planet / minor comet, Chiron, where that falls in one of the 12 signs. So just like you said, you're a Leo moon and Aquarius sun sign. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes.
That Chiron is in one of those 12 signs of the zodiac. And again, believing in astrology or not isn't important in my book, because astrology is kind of the diagnostic point. What's really significant is what it reveals as far as an area on a spectrum of core wounding or vulnerability. That's on a spectrum. Some of us have deep core wounds. If we've experienced childhood trauma and abuse, for example, if you were neglected or abandoned, there's certainly more of a wounding that you had to figure out how to manage, how to cope with. And it might have left you feeling like you're not good enough, or you're not important or valuable. And then that's what plays out in your adult relationships, where you don't feel valued, you don't feel seen and heard, as examples. And some of you, this might be more of an ouch, an area of vulnerability. Like your life is going well, you might have some vulnerabilities, but you didn't have these pain point experiences in your life. So wherever you fall in the spectrum, it's okay. Chiron wants you to know this area of yourself so you don't feel like you have to keep hiding it from others. Like you might meet someone new and, of course we lead with all the good things about ourselves, but we might feel ashamed about mistakes we've made. And that's not helpful. None of us are perfect, and we don't have to be. So knowing where Chiron is can help you understand where you just need to strengthen yourself. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And if you don't mind, maybe we can delve a little bit into what a core wound is. In my head, I
Sure.
think of it in my own life, for instance, is like, this keeps happening and it's unfair for myself.
Right.
And for the listeners, I'd shared with Lisa that I am working through my own process using her book, which has been just amazing. I will share at some point, but it's been very helpful. And I register like core wound for others. I will sometimes sense is like when I'm working with my patients, like, why does that keep happening to this person? But can you describe what is a core wound?
Of course. And what you're saying is really important, because we do, Charlize, sometime, come to our adult lives and we're feeling hopefully predominantly good, predominantly well, but there might be this one area that stumps us from time to time. And unfortunately, we sometimes make meaning that something's wrong with us, and we might shy away from those things that have been painful. And I talk in my book about it's like putting your hand on a hot stove. You never want to do that again. But unfortunately, we sometimes do that with relationships, with dating, with trying new things, with, putting ourselves out there, because something might have been so painful, like that metaphorical hot stove we touch, that we might then limit our life experiences to avoid hurting. And that can keep us from so many wonderful things that life has for us. So an example of a core wound is if Chiron falls in the sign of Aries, that speaks to a wounding or vulnerability in your sense of your value and worth. And a person with this wound or vulnerability looks like often a really successful person. You would never know that they struggle with self-esteem or valuing themselves, because this person typically is a type A achiever. You've achieved a lot of public success, yet deep down, you don't feel like you're good enough. And that's actually what keeps you doing. Even when you're exhausted and depleted, you feel like it's never enough, which deeper, you feel like you're never enough. And it's really depleting and depressing to achieve so much, but never feel like you're adequate. And we see this with a lot of very successful people that commit suicide, that take their lives, and it'll be like a CEO of a huge company, often really wealthy. And it's like, oh my gosh, they had everything, but they didn't feel connected to what they had. So recognizing Chiron in this placement having to do with your value and worth, you can start working with getting out of performance-based love, out of achievement to define yourself, and step into more of what does it feel like for me to just be? If I never achieved another thing, can I start to value myself because of who I am, that I'm kind, that I'm generous, that I might go out of my way for people to help them, and start to develop your self-esteem through those more intrinsic ways of finding meaning I talk about versus extrinsic value and meaning sourced through work and public accomplishment. And that can help shift that one pattern. And it's like this with the other core woundings, Chiron and Taurus, having to do with the core wounding by neglect. This is where we might see sexual abuse happening in someone's past, or a parent that had an addiction and neglected their emotional needs, or was a workaholic and was working to provide for the family, but was never at your dance recitals or football games, and you wondered why. Like, am I not important enough? Does that speak to what you were curious about, Charlize?
It sure does. So, when I'm working with the largest number of humans I work with my patients, one pattern I'll see, and you actually gave it words, is a patient that I might be treating that has several autoimmune diseases, because I'm internal medicine in my day job. So that's the part that brings them to me. And then I'll learn that they have had a history of being sexually abused as a child. And then I also learned that in their current marriage, they're being abused. Yeah, so I'll see like both, I'll see that over and over. And so, with I have just very basic working knowledge of astrology. Sometimes, I'll look at their birth date and I wonder, but I will
Yeah.
wonder, like, why is this happening over and over again for this poor person?
Yes.
Holding empathy for them, but I really do question, like, why. And that is a pattern I'll actually see. That's an archetypal patient for me.
Mm-hmm.
So my role, of course, is dealing with the physical body where the body is turned on itself. But
Right.
then, I don't ever have the luxury of finding out why. Um, so yeah, that does.
I think what you're saying is so important, Charlize, because from what I've seen and read, having to do, you mentioned autoimmune disorders
Mhm.
and the emotional connections to what emotionally might cause the body to start misfiring in that way.
Mhm.
And from what I have read and understood, there's often fear underlying, an area of fear in this person's life that's been really there, like that they can trace looking back, unhealed fear. And certainly that's present in sexual abuse and also being somehow mistreated or abused in a current partnership or marriage, or fear and maybe expressing fully who you are in the world. That I've seen fear really underlying autoimmune disorders. And I've also seen anger underlying cancers, anger that's really lodged in the person's body that hasn't been expressed adequately, hasn't been received, or anger turned inward at at the person themselves, where I think self-forgiveness is really important. And I talk in my book about the role of self-forgiveness to heal ourselves. I'm speaking emotionally and psychologically, and certainly it relates to physical healings as well, to forgive ourselves, forgive our bodies even for working against us, because that's what it's looking like, and autoimmune for sure, and cancer, like my body's betraying me.
Mhm.
And to really get to the deeper, emotional root causes of what might I need to forgive myself for, that I'm holding myself hostage about, or blaming myself, shaming myself, and start to send really loving, kind messages to the cells of your body. And I wonder what you think and believe about that as a doctor.
So, everything you're saying is exactly what I often wish to put to words. It would just be such a luxury because, I'm in a high volume practice and I see this real
Hmm.
time every day more than anyone can
Yeah.
imagine. And, because I'm dealing with the physical signs and we've got medications and all the serious stuff in the labs and the diagnostics. But, I really would like to slow down and actually say, like, you know, why are you turning against yourself? Where did you stop?
Right.
Where did you never learn to love yourself? Um,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean that no, everything you're saying is exactly what I feel. It's just that in the flow of my work, we don't get that luxury. I keep on it's a luxury, and it really would be a luxury. So hopefully
To have
more.
that time to really
Yeah.
sit and talk
Oh
with
yeah.
your patients and explore some of this.
Like where
But
did
I
this
think
come
you get to
from?
do that here on your podcast.
Sure
So
do.
I think that's a beautiful thing
Thank
that
you.
people, your patients, can listen,
Yeah.
to do that, some of that with themselves. And that was the hope and intention of my book, is that you take it and take time
Hmm.
with yourself. I suggest in the beginning to get a journal, even a
Good.
candle,
Yes.
and spend maybe 20 minutes sitting and read. I ask you questions to reflect, and you really hit on it, Charlize, where how did you turn against yourself? Because
Hmm.
that's really this core wounding piece, is, where we turn against ourselves to make meaning of something in our lives that didn't make sense, and to shift that, to
Hmm.
stop blaming ourselves and shaming ourselves for it, and forgive ourselves, and really ask to align with those solutions in moving forward with our lives.
So my next question, and yeah, I did ask you to go a little bit more into core wound because I know for me that was a term I was actually pretty new to. Would there be other ways that others might describe a core wound? So you describe core wound to me perfectly. I'm seeing it all the time. But I didn't have a name for it, but would there be any way we describe a core wound that shows up in your practice?
Sure. And Charlize, core wounding has definitely been called different things throughout the ages. In fact, Sigmund Freud in 1914 coined the repetition compulsion, which I talk about in my book, as being a pattern of relating, that we encounter the same issue, say, in different relationships with different people, and we're trying to heal it, but we seem to repeat these unhealed patterns. And then after Freud, the object relationists, spoke about as well this core wounding pattern, this repetition of adult relationships that we experience in childhood with our caretakers, and kind of the things that didn't work. We tend to attract that to us. And even modern day teachers, my mentor and friend, Catherine Woodward Thomas, who wrote the book on conscious uncoupling that Gwyneth Paltrow used in her separation from her husband, Catherine talks about the source fracture wound, which is her way of articulating core wounding, where it's like this area that something happens in our lives and in our mind where we really make these beliefs up about ourselves. Like, I remember growing up in a family where there was emotional trauma and abuse, and in all the yelling, feeling really scared and thinking that, oh my gosh, relationships are scary or marriage is scary, and kind of not knowing at that young age, I was kind of starting to make a pattern in my mind, a belief system about relationships. And I didn't realize till I was older, well, that's not something I want to keep carrying around. That just because my parents were yelling in their relationship doesn't mean I will in mine. And it doesn't mean love is scary.
Mm.
So I want to release that pattern of love being fearful, of love being scary, of love being conflicted and angry. And it took some years for me in therapy to uncover that that was even a belief I had, to release it and adopt instead, I believe that love is safe. I believe that love is patient and kind, and that we're going to work through things together from a place of curiosity and support. So, is that helpful to kind of
Mhm.
speak about it in a slightly different way?
Yes, thank you so much. It definitely is. And
Hmm.
while we're still discussing core wounding, um, I would like to ask you, for anyone that's listening that is um, and I sense is going to be strongly resonating with what you're saying about where they stand in their own life and what's happened as far as their own core wounding. How does one move from awareness that the core wound is there into transformation, or move into just knowing it's there, into healing that core wound? Um, how does that happen? Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, I like your question because I've recently, and I did a YouTube video about it on NOLA Therapy, my YouTube channel, where typically we think of people as good and bad, and to me that's so limiting, that there's evil people, even that it's so there's such polarity. When we look at ourselves and others, we're on a range, we're on a spectrum. And I came up with this literally within the last 2 months, where I see people on this spectrum of healed to unhealed. And so there's those of us that are, say, healed. We're like really doing well. We've addressed the things in our past that have held us back, and we're really rocking out our lives. And so there's the healed category. Then there's the healing. And I think most of us in the wellness field are in between the healing and healed. We might get triggered, so we have to do a little healing, but then we feel mostly healed. We're kind to others, people are kind to us, and we've really stepped into awareness and putting into practice when we need to do some healing work. We might go work with a therapist we've had for a while, or we might go see a different kind of practitioner. We know when we need to do some work on ourselves. And then I see, thirdly, people that are unhealed and aware. And this might be the person you meet to, say, date them. And they're like, oh, I like you, but I'm really in a bad spot. I just got out of this relationship. So they have an awareness, like something's not right. I'm not really there. I'm not available, but they might not have stepped yet into, say, booking the therapy sessions or starting the practices of healing and looking at oneself. And so they're aware that I have an area that's not quite fixed within me or whole, but like I'm not quite ready to do that work yet. And then there's those that are unhealed and really unaware, oblivious. And those are the people, I think, that cause a lot of harm. We hear that wounded people wound others. And that experience is really about someone who's unhealed, hiding their pain in you because they've disconnected from it so much that they're not. We see this in the empathy deficient disorders like narcissism, for example. And so that's when you develop a relationship with that person's pain, thinking it's a relationship with them. Does that make sense? So it's like the spectrum of being in relationship to what we need to heal or look at, and how much personal responsibility we're taking for it. With my book is really big on having an awareness. Okay, I've been wounded. I feel vulnerable in this area. And it might not be my fault why this happened or why I'm here, but it's our responsibility. What do I need to do now? Aware that this has hurt me. How do I heal so I can be happy? So I can really be healthy and be my full and whole self in this world, and unlimited versus limited by what's happened to us. And I want people to really be empowered.
As I am reading your book and working through the process, what always plays in my mind and my heart is empowerment. That is the sense I get as I'm journaling, as I'm answering the questions that you ask, and which I love because something I have asked myself, definitely my own patients and clients have asked me, is once we figure this out. Oh, a patient even asked me this earlier this week. Okay, now we talked about it and this is hard. So now what? What do I do? And I would translate this like, once we know this core wound is here, is it going to keep coming back?
Is that a question? That's a question.
Yeah,
for me,
yeah.
right?
Like, so if we identify, I think you mentioned if Chiron is in Taurus, in your house of Taurus, that leads to the neglect. So let's say, okay, I've identified that. Now what? Is this just going to be something I do every decade of my life? I feel neglected. Is this
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. Like, what do I do? Is this
Yeah.
going to keep coming back?
Mhm.
I'll use an example, as something that I have experienced personally in my own healing journey, and I often share with clients when it's appropriate. Is I see these triggers, this pain, this core wounding, areas of vulnerability, as like music coming through a speaker, a stereo, and it's like really loud when you're hurting, like when you're in grief, when you're grieving the loss of someone or something that's really loud. And as you heal, the volume gets turned down lower and lower and lower to where, yes, there are definitely moments where it's like off, where you're not feeling triggered, you're not feeling wounded, you're feeling really good about yourself, uh, you're relating to yourself and others in ways that light you up. You feel seen and heard. You're seeing and hearing others. And I'll use myself for an example with Chiron being in the sign of Aries and that vulnerability and wounding and my sense and value of worth. Once I learned that, Charlize, I could really focus whenever I felt off about something or someone. I was like, okay, is this an aspect of me not feeling valuable and worthy? And every time it was. And I asked myself then, well, how can I value and respect myself here in this situation? Do I need to say something to that person, or do I just need to say something to myself? And discerning, and there have been some circumstances where I do need to have a conversation with someone and say, hey, I'm not feeling really valued or respected. I'm wondering what that's about for you. Have I done something to offend or hurt you that I can take responsibility for and make amends? Or is this something more sourced within you? And, sometimes the person can have the conversation with you and sometimes they they can't or won't. And the good news is that you're able to have the conversation. It's about your growth. That was about my growth, that I could have conversations that I never used to be able to have because I was scared they might leave,
Mhm.
and even if they do, at least I took a stand for myself and asked about the situation, really wanted to repair it versus continuing to sacrifice my own emotions to be in a friendship or a relationship that I felt badly in. So you do get to a place where this is really healed for you. And as we go through life, we expand, we grow, we try new things. And it's like, oh, we might encounter that vulnerability again, or we might momentarily feel wounded, but we have the skills now to heal it, to talk about it. Hey, this didn't feel so good to me, or I did something that didn't feel so good to me. So we learn a whole set of skills to manage whenever this area of vulnerability or wounding comes up. We know what to do to be, again, really empowered.
Wow, thank you so much. I think that it helps to know, and I will share for the listeners that as you read Lisa's book, you really will feel empowered. I know that when I first started, I was a little nervous to even get into my own core wounds. Like, oh no, but it's like, here we go, rip that wax off. Here it goes. But it's not
Yes.
been that at all. It's a very very gentle process and really very empowering. And I have to say, Lisa, the pacing of your book, I'm really liking the way you share your experience and you have things for us, the reader, to do. Really helps working through this process. And I'm really looking forward because I actually don't know exactly where my house. I don't know where my house of Chiron's going to land yet. I haven't gotten to that point, but I'll let you know,
Sure. Well,
Lisa.
yeah, and if you go to my website, nolatherapy.com, and go to my book page, it's a button that says order my book. I just had a new connection there. So now it takes you right to where you enter your date of birth, your place of birth, and if you have it, your time of birth. And it literally will give you Chiron is in blah. So you don't have to look at an astrological chart. You don't have to read that wheel. That's very complex. So it's a new plugin that I just added to help you find where Chiron is. So it's much more easy than it used to be. And I really appreciate what you said, that my book was approachable and gentle, because I want people to know that healing, it can be gentle and easy instead of something we're so afraid to do. Like, I'm going to be depressed. I'm going to go to therapy and be depressed for 6 months because I'm looking at this painful stuff, where it's like really we can heal in a way that allows us to still be in our lives working, being in relationships, being with friends. Like, I want it to be user friendly so that you can really do this to completion, to fullness. And because a lot of times, therapy is presented as like it's going to be painful. It's just going to be awful. And you might have some awful, painful moments, but it's not going to be worse than you've already experienced without that support. So I'm here to like support you with my book and my work so that you can have an easier experience in your life.
Speaking of, Lisa, do you mind sharing with the listeners where they can find you? Because you are a podcaster, you have a website, you have a worldwide presence, you're on social media. Do you mind sharing some of your handles and a little information about your podcast?
No, I love that. I appreciate that so much, Charlize. My website, as I mentioned, is nolatherapy.com, standing for New Orleans, Los Angeles Therapy.com. Those are the NOLA therapy.com. That's also my Instagram, nolatherapy.com. I think if you put Lisa Tahir, I will come up. Certainly if you Google my name, Lisa Tahir, all of the connections come up. And I'd really love to connect with your audience because I love what you do, Charlize. I love that you're a doctor and you incorporate Reiki. It's so powerful that you have that medical knowledge and degree and licensure because you get to reach patients and people that myself being a clinical social worker, that I don't. So you're in such a powerful place to help people access other modalities, integrative medicine that you talk about and represent. And I'd love to give anyone from your audience half off either an individual session to work with me on Zoom, FaceTime, or phone, or half off a monthly unlimited. I got that from, like used to when I was growing up in New Orleans, there were all these like, you pay $5 and drink all night. So I thought, what if you paid a certain amount of money and you had unlimited therapy all month? So I initiated that at NOLA Therapy.
I love that. I've never heard of that and I love it. Thank you.
No, I haven't either. So just say if you want to text me, like, Lisa, do you have 5 minutes? And as soon as I have that time, I'll text you back and, we'll do unlimited sessions, however long or short, based on my schedule for a 30-day period. So it's half off that as well. Just mentioning you, your show, Art of Healing podcast, and to really offer that to your world.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining me. Listeners, I would really take her up on her offer. That's an amazing offer. Thank you so much, Lisa.
You're welcome. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. And listeners, I will be back with you very soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. And once again, thank you so much for joining me for this special episode with my guest, Lisa Tahir. I will make sure that you have access to all of her information. And for those of you that sign up to get my weekly newsletter, because every week I send out an email to let you know a podcast came out, I'll make sure that you have her information so that you can take her up on her special offer. This podcast is always a pleasure to create, and I just love the way that I get to connect with people from all around the world. So if you are a listener, just so you know, and you may not be aware, but I do send out a weekly newsletter. Within that newsletter, you can actually download the podcast straight to your device. And then we share other bits of information, but this one is a good one because there's a really valuable offer that'll be within that email. So if you'll check your show notes, I will have a link there where you can sign up, you can stay in touch. You'll also be able to find Lisa's information. Thank you so much, listeners, and I will be joining you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Art of Healing podcast. Once again, this is Charlize. You can find out more about me at www.healingartshealthandwellness.com. Did you know I have a blog as well as online courses? Check your show notes to sign up for more information about healing arts, health, and wellness. Thank you. Please feel free to share this episode with your friends, family, and loved ones.